All right. So excited to be here. Jen and I thought that we would just read a very short bit from each of our books, since some people may be familiar with one and not the other, and that can give us context for our conversation. So just briefly, before I jump into reading the part I'm going to read, the Book of Gothel is the story of the medieval midwife who will become known as the witch from Rapunzel. And in the beginning of the book, an academic finds this medieval manuscript in a cellar in Germany. And she's very excited about it because she hopes that it can help her get tenure. And at the end of the prologue, she sits down to read it, and then you turn the page and you get the first page of the manuscript. And so that's the part I'm going to read. It begins, Declaration. This is a true account of my life. Mother Gothel, they call me. I have become known by the name of this tower, a vine-covered spire stretching into the trees, cobbled together from stone. I have become known for the child I stole, little girl, my pretty, Rapunzel. I named her for her mother's favorite herb. My garden is legendary, row after row of hellebore and hemlock, yarrow and bloodwort. I have read many a spectrum on the natural properties of plants and stones, and I know them all by heart. I know what to do with belladonna, with lungwort, and cinquefoil. I learned the healing arts from a wise woman, the spinning of tales from my mother. I learned nothing from my father, a no-name fisherman. My mother was a midwife. I learned that from her too. Women come to me from all over to hear my stories, to make use of my knowledge of plants. Traipsing in their boots and lonely skirts through the wood, they come, one by one, with their secret sorrows, over the river, across the hills, to the wise woman they hope can heal their ails. After I give them what they seek and take my fee, I spin my stories, sifting through my memories, polishing the facts of my life until they shine like stones. Sometimes they bring my stories back to me, changed by retelling. In this book, under lock and key, I will set down the truth. In this, the 78th year of my earthly course, I write my story. A faithful account of my life, heretical though it may be, a chronicle of facts that have since been altered to correct the lies being repeated as truth. This will be my book of deeds, written from the famous Tower of Gothel, where a high wall encloses the flori and herbs. Hellebes, daughter of Hedda, the year of our Lord, 1219.
I'm so excited to be here. I loved your book, Mary. So excited to chat with you about it and all things magical, women, and writing. I'm going to go ahead and read a passage that I haven't read out loud before, and I'm going to have to bleep out the expletives. As someone said, this book is very fond of the F word, F for feminism. That's not the expletive, though. It's really, she loves that word, the F word. So I'll bleep that one out. So River Woman, River Demon, for those who don't know, is a murder mystery that takes place on the Rio Grande in Los Lunas, New Mexico, which is kind of like a suburb of Albuquerque. It's a little town just a few miles and minutes outside of Albuquerque. And it's about a woman who's a bruja, a witch and a healer, named Eva Santos Moon. And she's married to a professor of hoodoo and folk magic studies of the African diaspora at the University of New Mexico. And he's supposed to be at work getting ready for Dia de los Muertos celebration. And it's late at night. She's fallen asleep. She's tipsy. She's been drinking. And she hears a screaming from the river. And she runs out there. She thinks it's Jericho and he needs help. What she finds is that he's in the river with their best friend, Cecilia, dead in his arms. And so the story goes from there, right? And she has to use her magic to figure out what is going on. So here we have Eva is at Cecilia'S funeral. When the service ends, we're invited to pay our respects at the front of the chapel. The woman in the open casket doesn't feel like Cecilia. The unnatural flip of her hair as if styled for a 1950s sitcom, and not the natural beachy waves of the San Diego chick I knew. Her outfit muted and stifled, as if chosen by Elba herself. Her makeup clotted where I remember the bright red bauble of blood tendrilled from her hairline, soaking her hair, river wet and dripping. Her hands are folded serenely over a candle, her nails trimmed short and not jagged, not broken from fighting off her attacker. I can't even think past this thought. Her nails, broken from fighting Jericho off in the river. Jericho's her husband, by the way. Here in this cheap casket, her nails are plastered against her dead skin. There's a smudging of makeup, the same thick pancake foundation glistening its sham across Cec's face that covers her wrist, and as I lean toward the coffin to whisper under my breath, "Goodbye, witch, friend or foe, I'll never know." A faint purpling of flowers appears from beneath the buttercream color the mortician has missed. It's uncanny. Cecilia's bracelets of bruises match my own. Only hers haven't faded post-mortem. I reach out and touch the skin at her wrists and shudder at how waxen she feels. Same as her ghost who dragged me out of the house. I mouth, "Tell me, Cec. Tell me who did this to you," wrapping my hands around her wrists and slipping my fingers down her palms as if giving her a reading, tracing her love line across her lifeline to where it ended in the river outside my living room window. "Tell me." A woman behind me coughs. A few others in line shuffle and murmur. My time at the casket is over. The woman behind me in a wide-brimmed black hat clears her throat again louder, and I must unclasp Cecilia's hand from my own. Only I can't. She's clasping me back. She's tugging me into the coffin with her. I struggle to pry myself away, but our fingers have turned to flypaper, and she's grasping tight, the same as the night I summoned her through Santa Muerte. I'm shrieking, flailing, trying desperately to pull away from her coffin. The church-hatted woman is staring at me aghast, her eyes wide with terror. "What's the commotion?" Detective Paramos calling in her throaty official tone from somewhere behind the crowd now surrounding me. The whole funeral transformed into a spectacle of the murderer's wife wrestling with the corpse mistress. "Mrs. Moon, please, I have to ask you to step back from the coffin." I crane my neck to La Detective, who's now behind me, followed by Bobak and the social worker. I'm still pulling, trying desperately to pry my hands free. I catch La Detective's eyes pleading, "Help me," and keep tugging. "I can't," I choke, weeds in my throat. "She's holding me." "Mrs. Moon, come now, please." Effing La Detective thinks I'm messing around, ruining the effing funeral on purpose. Believe me, I've thought about it. That's not what's happening. I'm not doing this. I'm not. "Help me," I want to shout, but my kids are probably still on the pews with a niece, and I hope to Santa Muerte they're not watching their mother defile hers. "For F's sake, let go of her," Bobak hisses. "What the F, Eva?" I'm shaking my head and sobbing now, tears spilling onto Cecilia's arms and hands, muddying the mortician's work. La Detective puts her hands on my shoulders as a family member might calm a hysterical widow gently and says quietly into my ear, "I know you've suffered a tremendous shock, Mrs. Moon. Come on with me outside and let's talk. This doesn't have to go any further. Come on with me." She reaches into the coffin, pulls my hands away from Cecilia's, and the spell unlocks. The flypaper unsticks, and I am released. Did you want to start with questions, or should I?
I can start. Goodness. So Eva Santos Moon is a really interesting character. She's very fascinating. And I'm really interested in like how you chose, like first let's just start with like how did the idea for this book come to you? How did that work?
Yeah,
How did Eva come to you?
That's such a great question. I'm going to ask you the same, so
Okay.
so be ready because I'm fascinated by your process too. So I am a practicing bruja and interested in curanderismo and magic and how that intersects with religion. And so I grew up Catholic, and I wanted to find kind of the places where like spirituality and my faith also mixed with the possibility of, like in your book, one of the things I love is like the old knowledge of women and like the wisdom. And so as I was seeking a connection to my indigenous ancestors, I was also like digging deeper into the culture, which like I was accessing knowledge and wisdom that hadn't been taught to me through the church. And so I had like just this wealth of ideas that were floating around. And then at the same time, right, that I was kind of having a, I don't know, like a spiritual awakening into the realm of like randerismo and brujeria. I was also reading a lot of murder mysteries. And this came from, strangely enough, it was kind of a medicine for me because I was going through a major bout of postpartum depression. And the murder mysteries, especially the ones that had an unreliable narrator and a woman who was like kind of doing really socially unacceptable things, and like it felt so freeing, right? To see women on the page who were either like just didn't care what society thought or were like solving these murders. Like it was empowering. And it was also just a lot of fun to read. And so it came together in that I noticed that one of the things as I was reading, I noticed that I wasn't seeing a lot of Latinas and indigenous women. In fact, I was in what I think that's changing now, but this was several years back and I wasn't seeing any, brown women. And so I wrote that. I wrote us into the genre, if you will. And so I think of River Woman, River Demon as my Chicana girl on the train. Thanks. And so okay, I have like a long question. Will you bear with me because I want to give the Book of Gothel some praise here. I just loved it so much. Okay, so as you can tell from River Woman, River Demon, I love flawed characters that we root for. But more than anything, when we say flawed, we mean human. And I love the reclamation that occurs in your novel on so many levels in regard to, oh my goodness, remind me of the main character's name.
Halavis.
Halavis, thank you. In regard to Halavis and the circle of women that she comes from, her lineage and birthright connection to the mother goddess. Halavis gets angry. She can be rash and impetuous. She's lunar and prefers shadow. And I love to see her get angry because it was righteous anger. And so you managed to show a breadth of all of these complicated emotions and humanize her. Ultimately, she's Mother Gothel, right? But she's not a villain in your book, even though she's so complex. And so I felt like this was stunning. And I wanted to know, how do you do it? What led you to reclaim Mother Gothel? Like, why tell this story of Mother Gothel in the Rapunzel tale? Why the righteous anger of women? And how do you do so in a way that we're rooting for this character?
Well, I think that there's like kind of a creative process story to the beginning of the book, and then I can talk about why it was the way it was. But so to begin with, I was working on another book entirely, and there was a character in that book who went into their grandmother's attic and found like this old manuscript. And whenever she sat down and started reading the manuscript, when she turned the page, when I imagined it, like I got all these chills all over me. And I had this moment, and it wasn't, the book I was writing was not about the manuscript. It was just like a plot point in this other book. But I was so fascinated with this manuscript and what it contained that I was like, well, maybe I'll just write the manuscript and just see what's there. Like, not to do anything with, I'll just write it in the margins. And then I'll, once I know, then I'll figure out how it pertains to the plot and I'll keep going. And so 8 years later, but no, so basically I sat down and I tried to write what was on the book, and I realized like, okay, it's from the 12th century. It's really older than I would have thought. I don't know how it got into her attic. And then I started, writing. I had kind of like, I'm one of those writers who gets like voices in their heads, not, out in the world, but I just listen and I write down what these characters say. And Halavis, she told me her name, and she started to tell me this story, and I was kind of like taking it down, and the whole time I was writing it, I was really fascinated that she kept telling me that she was in all these stories. It was like, oh, and I did this, and that became Red Riding Hood, and I did this, and that became this, and the stories are all completely wrong, and on top of that, it comes from history, and I met this person and that person, and I was like, get out of here! This is like a crazy idea. And so I started writing it that way, and I kind of started when she was telling me that, and the imagination works this way. Like when she was telling me that they got all the stories wrong, I started thinking about why all the stories would be wrong, and like why, if she was the witch from Rapunzel, like if she was a real person and she said she got it wrong, like what would that mean, and how would she be defamed in the way that she was, and so I started looking into the history of women who were persecuted for witchcraft, and then back in the 12th century, we're talking about like it was referred to as black sorcery. The only documents about it are Catholic documents that describe it a certain way, and so I tried to like read what was there in those documents and then say like, what could it have been? Like what would these women say that they're actually doing, as opposed to what the church or the scribes or what the townspeople who called them witches or, evil women, like, what were they really doing? Just assuming that, these records are going to be biased, because starting with the idea that humans are flawed, and, so that was where it came from. And I wanted to try to see the kind of the truth behind the lies of these stories.
I love that it started as a manuscript in a manuscript. That's so meta and so awesome. Did anything happen with the book that you were originally writing, or was given put in the side?
It is in a drawer. It is gone. Yeah, I got so fascinated with Hellebes that I was like, whatever. I mean, it's still there. I'm sure maybe one day I'll do something with it. But yeah. I was far more into.
That's funny. I sense that about her character, right? That she's just this larger than life character, but she has all of these emotions, and I love that she just came to you and told you, this is my story, and like she pulled you away from your other story.
Yeah, she did.
I have to write mine. That's awesome.
Yeah. So like speaking of flawed characters, like with Eva, one of the things that really fascinates me about her is just that she is a mother who makes poor decisions. Like she gets angry too. Like you said, she drops a ton of F-bombs all over the place. Drinks a lot, makes all these decisions that are extremely questionable. And you just don't see, like, not only women, but especially mothers depicted that way in fiction. So mothers who have flaws, right? And I wanted to know, like, what drove you to try to write about a character like Eva Santos Moon, and then also like to give her a shot at redemption, which I think the book does do. It gives her a shot at, like the traditional heroine or hero, like they have a tragic flaw and then they have to try to overcome it, right? So what drove you to write about her?
I mean, so for one thing, in a lot of ways, she's me. I mean, that's just the reality for me. In that, I raise my children with a whole lot of love and, and boundaries. But other than that, like, I was, like I said, I grew up in a very religious environment. There were, even though I grew up with a very loving mom, she was dealing with her own trauma and her own mental health struggles. And so I just tried really, really hard to like not put onto my children any of the shame and the shaming and like that gets put onto us by society, by religion, by like any of the social constructs. It's kind of like, just as a person, I've had trouble. Like I've been sassy and rebellious. Like I came out of the womb that way, and so I encourage my children to ask questions. And so like the F-bombs, I mean that's just me, right? And like I tell my children, words have the power that we give them, and like they're all just words. And teaching like appropriate times to say things or not, and strangely enough, my kids don't cuss at all. And I think it's kind of like. When you have taboos and shame and like things that you can't do and like then kids want to do it. But if it's like you tell them why people do it or not, and you give them a choice, like it's not really fun anymore to rebel. And so like that's just me as a mom. And so it's interesting for me when I hear people say that Eva is an unlikable character for one thing, it's like I've really had to guard my writer heart because it's been sort of devastating, the reality of it, honestly, because I didn't know that she was unlikable. Like, I love her. She's me. You know, like, I love her as a friend, as a sister, as a, you know, someone that I care about. And, you know, she's suffering from trauma. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that she was traumatized in young adulthood, or not young adulthood, in teenagehood. And so I think in many ways, a part of her has stayed a teenager. And that's very much my own experience as well. And so, like, mothering my children, now they're teenagers, and I'm like, wow, I'm growing up now. You know, my kids are 12 and 15, and I'm like, let's see what happens now when they're like 20 and 30, because I had them at 23 and 26. And so, like, I was a teenager, and then I was a mom, you know. And so it's like writing the books and raising the protagonist, and like, it's like raising myself. So I very much see writing as mothering the page. That's what I call it. And I think it's a form of really mothering myself, and I hope those that need it. And so I think that my work speaks most deeply to people who have experienced trauma, especially that which has been like, specifically probably violence against women, which in whatever form, because that's, you know, that's the experience that I'm most deeply speaking from. So I didn't set out necessarily to, like, show a bad mom, because I think that she's actually a really good mom, right? I think she's actually, like, she's in a terrible situation, and she's doing the very best she can. And, like, her sister has come to help, and her sister helped her when she was a child. So she knows that her kids are taken care of. And so it's like, for the first time in a long time, she's focusing on herself. And I think that as moms, we need to do that as well, because, like I said, you know, I'm learning now, like, I have to grow up, I have to mother myself, you know. And I think that's probably what the journey, that's probably, like, Eva's heroine journey, is that she's now learning these things that she didn't learn in as a teenager and in young adulthood. And, like, all of the lies and the gaslighting around her, right, have kind of stunted her, because she doesn't know herself. And I think that, like, as the mystery unfolds, the deeper mystery of her characterization is, like, who am I, right? And I think that's what I hope people get out of it. And if, you know, if it helps to kind of liberate women, especially women writers, from the idea that, like, a protagonist has to be likable, in whatever that means. Because I think by likable, we mean, like, socially acceptable. And I'm like, heck no, right? Why would we want to be that? Society sucks. You know, like, so many facets of society are terrible. Like, why would we want to be acceptable to a society that has never really seen us? You know? Does that happen?
Yeah. I think one of the things about, like, the book is truly, like, the murder mystery is really compelling. And I think I told Jenn this before. Like, when I was finishing it, I started having chills, and I started getting really scared, and I started worrying about, like, I started having paranoid thoughts myself. Like, Eva's thoughts, it's fine. Like, that's why you read thrillers. That's exactly the experience you want, you know? But I think that the part of the reason I wanted to ask that question is because, like, you know, she starts off far less, like, I don't know, like, whole than she does at the end. And, like, it's a real pleasure to see this really human, really flawed mother, like, then go through this. She goes through hell, and I'm not going to censor that, because that's true. What she goes through. And then at the end, you know, she gets a shot. It's like a surprisingly hopeful ending for a book that goes to such dark places. So that's,
I feel like, just from a craft perspective, the way that I do that in this book, and I hope in all of my books, is that I truly go into the duende when I write. And so I write from this place of the psyche, the subconscious, the underbelly, and so going down where, like, the monsters are, essentially, and then coming up hopefully with a piece of light then to put onto the page. You know, so the hero's journey, but the heroine's journey, right? And so I've been wondering too about, and I'm so sorry that I can you please say the protagonist's name for me again?
Hilde. It's the like, the Middle High German ancestor to the French Hellenes.
Oh, okay.
So Hilde.
Yeah. I'm still gonna probably ask you again and again. But it's beautiful. I love her name. So what was it like writing from the POV of a woman who lived during the Middle Ages? Like, how did you, because I feel like the way that you wrote her perspective, I felt like I was very much there with her. I was in her thoughts and I was following her journey. Like, I felt like she was right next to me. And she was a good friend. And I actually cried at the end when her story was over because I didn't want to leave her. Like, I just loved her so much. And so I'm wondering, like, wow, the research that you did as well, but like, do you have advice for us, or just like, what was your experience like with getting that deeply into her perspective?
Oh,
I mean, just because she lived so long ago, like,
yeah,
what was
yeah.
it like to like put yourself into the Middle Ages?
Sure, yeah. So, I wrote the book. I was a full-time professor while I was writing the book, and I was living in upstate Michigan, and I would come home from teaching, and I would hang out with my eldest child, and I would have a good time with them, and I would read picture books, and then I would go to bed, and then so I would, at that point, it was time for them to go to bed, and at that point I kind of thought, okay, what am I going to do? And as a creative person, like, I need to do something creative every day. Also raised Catholic, and the Catholic guilt goes into the creative production. If I don't produce, it's like I don't go to church, so it's a problem. So late at night, I had to do something, and like I'd written other books, but I wanted to try to do something finally that was really escapist. And like it's cold in the winter, and sometimes it gets down to negative 30 degrees, and I'm in my room under the covers with my laptop, and the wind is howling through like around the house, and I'm like, well, where do I want to be transported to? And so it was just a huge escape for me to like listen to her and have her tell me about it. And a lot of times, like I would write something and I'd be like, oh, I don't know what that would be like back then. Let me stop everything and research it. And that's like I had a professor of writing who would tell me, like, no, you just write the whole book and then you go back and fix it later. And I'm not that person. I'm like, let me find out all the details now. And so, but for me, I'm just a real big history nerd, and it's fun for me to do those things. And so it was it was an escape, really. And that was I don't know that, but I loved living in the, all that time after work, going to in the summer, getting more time to write, and just spending time in this, 12th century Germany, but not 12th century Germany, with these like magical elements in the Black Forest before it was called the Black Forest, before it was a certain area. Like there was deforestation in the Middle Ages, and they think that the Black Forest used to be much larger, so it extends much larger in geography. So I like found out all these details, and then I wrote it that way. And then I traveled to Germany, and I like walked in her footsteps and found some of the details that way too.
Yeah, I saw that you had a grant.
Yeah.
So tell us about your experience in Germany.
So in 2013 or something, I applied for a grant from the Sustainable Arts Foundation, and they're this organization that offers grants to parents who are writers and artists. And I had the beginning of this book written, and I took my manuscript with me and carried it to Germany. I flew over there, and every day I started in the city where she was born, and I went to like the old part of town that would have existed then, and I went to city museums where you could see these really ancient maps of what the geography was like. And at night I would just go home and I would like scratch through all the things that were wrong in my manuscript. And then I would just go to the next place. I went hiking in the Black Forest, and I went to St. Hildegard's, her church where it exists now, and her shrine, and her relics, and went to the abbey. It's not like the main abbey, the upper part of the abbey was destroyed, and I'm gonna blank on the name of the war, but it was destroyed like 300 years ago, and all that remains is the cellar, which is beneath the streets of the city of Bingen. So some places have these cellars that are under the house. Like some houses actually have cellars that were originally part of the Abbey. And so like that's where I got the idea for the beginning, you know, because you could actually walk down to a place that like climbs some kind of underground structure. But yeah, so I got to go to all those places, and it was a whole lot of fun, and
yes, apply to them for if you're a parent. I think just children under 18.
It's under 18.
It's eligible for anyone who has children. Yeah. That reminds me of when I was researching for Trinity Sight, and I very much get my family involved in the process, and we like act out scenes and like so one of the things that as we were also traveling around to all of the different sacred sites and just really different parts of the landscape in New Mexico, I was trying to imagine what it would be like for Calliope, my protagonist, who was pregnant with twins, and then she's also like carrying the neighbor girl Yunju through this landscape. And so my daughter was, I don't know, when I was writing the book, probably like 4 to 6 or something like that. And so I would pick her up and like run with her in these different areas so that I could get the actual physical feeling of being that character, right? And embodying that. So I love that you also have the similar, like putting yourself in that place and like physically being there, but then also like creating that space wherever you are, right? In your bed in Michigan. And
yeah. So that makes me think about Eva's point of view. Like one of the great things about River Woman and River Demon is just that it feels like Eva is just telling you the story, and it's like so tightly from her perspective. Like I think there's a part at the very beginning where she talks, I think it's I don't know if it's like semi-ironically or what, but she talks about I don't know, it's also sweet, but she talks about her kids as like this salt and pepper shaker. And I'm like, that's exactly how she would say that. And the whole book is that way. There's all these details. So like when you wrote the book, does it come out that way, or do you have to like go back and tighten it and put those in? Like what is that process like?
It's very similar to how you describe your process of your protagonist just coming and speaking to you. And I feel like I always have several projects going at once, whether it's my poetry collection. I have 5 full-length poetry collections and then 3 novels. And then I'm finishing up a young adult middle grade book with my daughter that we're sending out to publishers. I've always got a lot of projects going on. And I have 10 things right now, like with your novel that started as a novel in a novel. And so I always have all these ideas, but I don't feel like a book actually gets started and I really devote my time and energy to it until I have a voice. And so voice is queen. I feel like I tell all writers that, no matter what you're writing, voice is queen. And so a voice will just come out. And I realized, okay, this is someone whose story I need to tell. And like I said, Eva in a lot of ways is me, but I feel like she's an aspect of me, right? That because, even though I say, I try to be like outside of society and all of that, and I can't be, right? And she allows me, like, I think that she was an aspect of society. An aspect of, the me within me that just kind of wants to, give the bird to to society because it's wrong. So many people have wronged her, and then she has to learn, right, also how she's wronged other people as a result. And I feel like that's really the growing up process for her, is that she has to take accountability and responsibility. But so it was just a lot of fun to write her perspective because it was like what so much of who I am is absolutely loving and kind, and I try to come from this place, but it's like a place that I have to meditatively be in, because there's also a really angry part of me too. And that's what I loved about your protagonist so much, that she expresses her anger. And I feel like Eva allowed me to express that anger and to get it out on the page and to transform it. And so like with the salt and pepper shaker of her kids, my mom actually had bought me, before I ever had kids, I used to collect precious moments dolls. They weren't precious moments, but similar in style, and it was a boy and a girl. And I was like, Mom, because that's a lot of pressure. I was actually had gone through quite a bit of trauma, like with child loss and all of that around that. I was kind of, why are you buying me these? Like, what if I don't have a boy and a girl? What if that's not possible? And then I did. Like, we adopted our son, and I gave birth to my daughter, and we had our and I felt like So there's always a lot of irony, but there's also a lot of love and appreciation and gratitude in everything that Eva does. And I feel like that was the voice that came to me, was someone who was like so earnest, and she just like throws herself into everything with passion and love, but then also like, she's angry, and I feel like that commingling allowed for the story to just flow out. And I had to go back and fix quite a few plot things and, and bring in scenes because I was mostly just in her head. Like when I first wrote the book, it was like she just wanted to keep talking and talking forever. I was like, okay, pull that back. Let me bring in some actual dialogue and scene because like otherwise it was just her diary essentially because she wouldn't stop talking. Okay, I have other questions for you.
All right. I want to check on time too. Okay.
Are we good?
Like probably.
What do you think? 10 more minutes and then.
Okay.
So throughout your novel, women's knowledge often has to be hidden and secret, and yet so many women actually do know or know someone who understands the old ways where women's knowledge was revered and secret. Tell us about your process. Well, you've already told us about the researching, but if you want to tell us more about this aspect of it, the cures and plants, the wives' tales and history that went into its creation, why was it integral for you to tell a story that centers on women's knowledge and then specifically toward like the magical elements of it?
So folklore and fairy tales are often affiliated with like wives' tales, right? Women sitting by the fire, women spinning, and we kind of like imagine this iconic medieval woman, coming and talking at her kids and telling stories, or talking to other women and telling the stories, and then that's kind of the myth. And then when you actually look into how folklore has changed over time, a lot of the fairy tales are written down by men,
Right.
And so it's only been more recently, like in the past, I don't want to get too specific, but 30 to 50 years that we started asking, what might they have been like before that, And there's a theory in folklore circles that a lot of fairy tales like Rapunzel actually have roots in Indo-European religion, like matriarchal religion. And so I wanted the magic in the Book of Gothel to explore that element, to sort of like to surface these magical women's elements that are kind of hidden inside the stories because they've been told so many times, written down so many times, by people who are different from maybe the people who originally told them, and by religious scribes written down by rich men instead of like peasant women, or whoever. And so that I wanted to think about, what was it originally, not originally, because their folklore is ongoing, right? But like if it were written in the 12th century and if some of this had survived, what would those beliefs be? And it was just like it was a kind of a healing thing for me to imagine too, just because part of the way I wanted to write the book was like to give yourself permission to believe in the magic. I wanted to escape into it, and so that's why it starts with that prologue with the academic finding this manuscript, because then it's like it's not just this story, it's this real thing in the real world, and so I wanted to get permission to believe in all of this stuff.
Beautiful. I love that answer. I feel like with all of my books too, it's like one answer for where did you get your inspiration. It's like I just wanted to find a way to, like, for instance with Trinity Sight, to bring like God and theoretical physics and like indigenous belief. Like I just wanted to find a way for it all to come together. That's all I wanted to do. Like find God and in all of this, find permission to believe. I love that phrase. That's exactly why I like to.
I don't know. Maybe is that a good place to stop for maybe a Q&A?
Yeah.
Okay, so no, but I will say that the original version of the Book of Gothel had the academic story woven throughout. It was a much longer book, and so she was sort of going through the permission to believe part of the book. So that was an earlier manifestation of the book, but no, I don't think it needed to. I think that Heladese's story was so strong compared to that story, and I think that I was working out when I wrote that section. I was working out like, can I believe in this or not? You know what I mean? Like, so I was trying to make it something that this professor could actually like wonder, could this be true or not? Because I wanted it to be like right on the borderlands between truth and fantasy. You know? So no, but there was a piece of it that's missing. So I think it's the better book.
Yeah, I was gonna say, why did you pull it out?
I couldn't get the momentum of the book to work. Like, it was just Heladese's story was so much more propulsive, and every time you got back to the academic, it was like, oh, her again.
But I love. Tell me her name again. Heladese.
Yeah.
I love that she just kept insisting, like, no, tell my story.
She shouted over the academic, and now she's dead.
Such an insistent character. For me, major inspiration is Toni Morrison, Beloved, and I read that when I was 16, and it was at a time when my trauma was, obviously very different in so many ways, but it was like the first time that I saw that kind of an expression of like of a woman's story, like who had violence against her, and she and she's, I would say that Setha is like, one of, the most flawed characters in a lot of ways, like in how she responded to trauma and grief. But like that we get the context of where her actions came from, right? And then her transformation in that she's given a chance to redeem herself, another opportunity to protect her children comes around, and she like finally has grown up and like makes the right decision. And so I would say that Setha for me like very much mirrors Eva and what she goes through in River Woman, River Demon. And then the other one is Ana Castillo's So Far From God. And so when you were talking, Mary, about the like borderlands between magic and reality, and kind of like giving yourself permission to believe, one of the reasons that I go to magical realism again and again in my work is that I want to have this place where it exists, right? Where magic exists and is real and is protective. And that's the story here, is that this protective magic is going to protect this family. And so in Ana Castillo's So Far From God, there's a scene that stayed with me forever, where one of the characters and her girlfriend are running away from a violent man who intends them great harm, and they jump off of a cliff. And in the reality, right, they've just jumped off of a cliff. But in the story, they are turned into myth and they live on forever, and that in this world of So Far From God, both realities exist. And I feel like that is the power of magical realism for me, that it creates this space where we are safe, where we are protected, where, we do like come back, right? We can come back from whatever hell we've been through. And so, yeah, those two for me, I would say, are two of my greatest influences. And I read them both at the very beginning of my writing journey.
So I wanted to be a writer since I was like 9 years old. Imagine me with my notebook, like going out to the weeping willow in my backyard and like writing a science fiction novel. that was me. And I think the one that first kicked that off was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle, and that book for me, I really loved Meg because she was. I mean, it was even back then. It was like a flawed heroine. Who
was my favorite book, by the way. As a child, Lena and I have read it a bunch of times. Sorry.
Yeah. So that one was really inspirational to me, and I do think it's because of there being this flawed heroine who goes through a journey and learns something about herself, and then later when I was in college, I read Gregory Maguire's Wicked, and I was a huge fangirl for him, and I happened to pick the book up in an airport, and I just really fell in love with it, which makes his blurred life a completely surreal out-of-body experience. But so that book, and I got the idea from that, of this idea that you could completely turn traditional stories on their head, and then I started to think like, whoa, wow, if you're going to interact with traditional stories, like why not turn them on their head, like why, otherwise, leave them alone, I guess, So I did that. So he was the one who got me into retellings, and then I don't know, all of the I wish I had like a inspirational and like very deep story there, but I don't. Like all I think about is like these writers who have stories that are on the like right between reality and fantasy, like people like Shirley Jackson and Alice Hoffman. So these stories that give you permission to believe by making so much. There's so much fact in it that when a ghost appears, you're like, the ghost is in the real world, and that I think that's one of the big reasons why I write.
For me too, that would be like Jessamine Ward Sing Unburied Sing. That's another one that like the reality is and the culture and the like social justice aspects just shine through, and then also there's a ghost and it's important, right? Yeah. But it's so real, and then there's a ghost, Yeah, I love that.
I would love to write another book inspired by a fairy tale. I wrote a whole chapbook of fairy tales turned on their head while I was working on this. Like I would have like spin-off ideas and I would turn them into poems. So I've done that. And I love folklore so much, so I would certainly love to go back to that in the future. When I sold the Book of Gothel, it was a 2-book deal. So I am writing the second book now, and it is a retelling, but it's not a folkloric retelling. It's the story of Shakespeare's Dark Lady from her own perspective. So that's what. But she's a witch. So she's a witch, and there's magic, and it's all like based around Elizabethan conceptions of magic. So I kind of like looked up like what would they believe then, and what would they really believe instead of what they were accused of believing. So I get to do that too.
And I've heard you say too, like you're so like this is so much fun to write this book that you're working on, and that you can't believe you get to write this book.
I can't believe I get to write. I wanted to write that book. When I was in grad school, I made a list of things I wanted to write for this independent study on retellings, and that one was like number one. I want to write the Dark Lady book. So it's kind of crazy though. It's kind of really exciting.
You've got the chops to do it.
I hope I can do it justice.
You will. I'm excited to read it. Hop in. Oh, thank you so much. I love that question. And I feel like there is, and I'd love to hear your answer too, because I think there are twists too, or just kind of your process. But I definitely do have to reverse engineer. So I have a skeleton that I build, and this is my husband in the audience, Andrew, and he and I will just for hours and hours and hours, I'm talking like weeks, we're just talking about plot and story and and he helps me, like, we'll record it so that I'll remember what I said, as I'm building these stories and building these characters. And it's already someone, like I said, the voice came through first. And so a lot of times what will happen is I'll do a free write where I have like 100 pages that just was voice came out. And it was like I said, it's like their journal and they're just telling me their story. But then all of these things came up and I'm like, what? So then, okay, let me reverse engineer and I know exactly what happened. And then I start writing it. I thought I knew exactly what happened, right? And I start writing. But then, as you said, like how, oh my God, what? It's because, okay, I read the story and I was pronouncing it differently in my head the whole time. Like with all of us readers who mispronounce words forever, like I still, cicada. I still can't say cicada. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know that word because I just grew up reading words, not hearing them. so I pronounce her name differently in my head. Yeah. But yeah, it's like Eva would just all of a sudden something would happen or she would do something and then I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, or something would just appear to her and I had this perfectly like plotted out skeleton and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, wait a second, so now I have to go back in. And Andrew is such a wonderful friend and partner and husband, and he'll go through the whole process with me, talking everything out again, and then I'll go back to the page. So it's a process of that all the way through the book where and then the big twists that come. Some of them I knew from the beginning, and I put those red herrings in, and some of them were truly organic and a surprise to me when it happened. I'm like, oh my God, and I finally realized something. And then I have to go back to the beginning and plant those red herrings. So it's fun. It's sometimes like terrifying because I feel like I'm wandering around in the dark. But when I'm in the right headspace, to be there with the character, it's a whole lot of fun. So yeah, and then going back and like revising it, I have to see it from a fresh perspective because I knew who done it from the beginning, but it's fun to like go back and see if I can surprise my reader. So I'm excited that you thought the twist worked. Thank you. What about your process in terms of like,
it's actually really similar. I have a husband too with an Excel spreadsheet. Who's actually a historian of a different history than medieval Germany. But I have this voice character who tells me things, and then you always need to, like, whoever it is, you need somebody that you can talk to about it. So sometimes I'm talking to my husband. Sometimes I've actually talked to my daughter and discovered things. So it's that, and then there's also this process of discovery as you're writing, and like sometimes I have a minimum word count that I'm trying to get in for a day, and I have a deadline trying to make that, but then some days are kind of just destroyed because I discover something fantastically fun, and then I have to like do a bunch of word searches so I can like plant all these threads and like change all the details, and I use Microsoft Word as a place to like go back.
Me too.
Add that stuff.
Me too.
So.
Yeah, I tried using like a different software, but I'm a Word writer all the way, and I do it kind of manually. But.
Yeah. and that's even true. I was trying to think of a twist, but I thought of something, and it was a huge. When I learned that this happened in Gothel, I was just destroyed, and then I had to go back in and add it.
I think I might know what you're talking about.
Probably.
Because there's one thing that destroyed me in the book too. That's Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.